Welcome, everybody. I'm Jan Kruger, the Executive Director of Imagine More, and we're really excited to have you join us today on the workshop with Milton Tyree on co-creating employment with discovery. I'm joined here with my colleagues Fiona McIntosh, who's the School to Work Coordinator, and Julia Shoemaker, who's the School to Work Facilitator, as well as some other colleagues from Imagine More. So thank you for joining us. We're really excited to be able to spend the next couple of hours with you. Today, we're meeting from many locations across Australia, and we join you today from Ngunnawal country. We acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, as well as the traditional owners of the land on which each of you are living, learning and working from today. We recognise the ongoing, enduring and deep spiritual connection that the traditional owners have to this land and its waterways, animals and plants. We pay our respects to the elders past and present, for they hold the memories, the traditions and the culture and the hope of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples across the country. So just for those that don't know about Imagine More, we're a Canberra-based family-led organisation, and we have a clear vision around striving for a community where everybody's included, valued and contributing through meaningful roles. And we do this by empowering individuals and families and the community members to become inspired through stories, motivated and capable of ensuring people with disability hold valued social roles, develop meaningful relationships and live a typical life in their community. So we do this through a number of mechanisms. So we offer one-on-one consultations with people. We host peer groups where we bring families together to share sort of what they're learning or where they're up to. And following this particular workshop, we are offering families a follow-up session to help sort of go through what they've learnt and how to then apply what they've learnt in their own circumstance. So that will be on the 16th of March and the 6th of April, and we'll give some more details about that shortly. We also run topic-based workshops, and we've got one coming up on social role valorisation on the 30th and 31st of March. That's with John Armstrong, who's a senior trainer in social role valorisation, which if you haven't heard about that framework, you'll be hearing about that today from Milton. And then if you enjoy what Milton has to share with you today, keep your eye open for our upcoming conference that's called Opening Opportunities, and it's around employment for people with disability, where Milton will be joining us in person in Canberra on the 25th and 26th of May. And also what's a pivotal part of the work that we do is family leadership, because we know when families are strong and the person with disability at the heart of that family is well supported, then they're more likely to get the good things in life. And one of those main areas when people move into adult life is employment. So we've been funded through the Department of Social Services to run a project on School to Work, and this is what this event is sitting under. And this project is being led by Resourcing Inclusive Communities, and our other consortium partner is Community Resource Unit in Queensland. So there's three organisations, one in Queensland, one in New South Wales and here in the ACT running this project. And where this project came about is we really wanted to see better employment outcomes for people with developmental disability. And we know that there's a significant lack of ideas around how to customise and support people to customise their employment pathways. So this is a fantastic project to enable us to share workshops like today and do some follow-up sessions with families while they're waiting for services to be well funded and support customised employment in Australia. So we're really excited that you're joining us here today. And we've got good news too, that this project has now been extended till June 2024. So we're really pleased that we'll be able to continue this work with you. So just finally, before I hand over to Milton, I just wanted to let you know that we will be doing some follow-up sessions with families online, and those sessions will be held on the 16th of March and the 6th of April. In the feedback form, you'll be asked what sort of times will work for you best to be able to join both of those sessions. And we know that sometimes you can get this information and then you may feel a little paralysed about where to start. So that's the intent of these follow-up sessions, is to help you take action and have those conversations to guide you through the discovery process. We can be a sounding board. We can look at things that you're discovering about your family member and feel more supported by the peers that are also getting this information today. So we hope you'll find that helpful. We know that it's been helpful for a number of families here in the ACT, and we want to extend that to more families to get this going. So I'd like to introduce Milton Tyree, who's joining us from Kentucky in the States. Milton's been doing some work with us over the last couple of years, and we're learning a lot from his knowledge and wisdom and application of customised employment, but also together with his knowledge around social role valorisation. And to me, that's where the magic happens, when we bring those two frameworks together. And discovery is the first step. So we wanted Milton to join us today to sort of help unpack, what do we mean by discovery? What is this? What does this term mean in real life? And he'll be taking us through some of his experiences and getting to the heart of what he noticed about a young man called Tim. So I'd like to hand over to Milton. Thank you very much, Milton.
Okay. Thank you, Jan. Good morning. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here to present information about the process of discovery and why I've come to see discovery as essential in the work of open employment. You know, not just getting a job that the person can do, but learning about a job that he or she is motivated to do, finds purposeful, learning information about the look of a good job, fitting, suitably challenging, socially valued work. And so I'll be sharing things that I've learned from other people, professionals who've taught me about discovery as an alternative to testing people or merely asking people what they want to do, and what I've learned about discovery from people with disabilities and their family members who've helped me understand this process through their life experience and their willingness to share that. So I'm hoping these ideas and learnings that have been helpful for me will be useful for you too. So in this section, I'll begin by describing a bit more about the purpose of discovery. And then I'll describe some of its characteristics and the process to go through. And then I'm going to spend a bit of time going through examples for my very first time working with somebody in discovery and some important lessons learned. And in the context of this story, we'll have some time for everyone here to explore these implications for the principles in the life of a person that you have in mind this morning, or as I'll say, the person of your focus. And we'll be looking at some translation of the principles, sometimes in small groups and sometimes using chat. So the purpose of all of this then is to connect us with the relationship between discovery and job development. And at the end, we should have some time to get started with a bit of the process of discovery for the person of your focus, with a discovery journal that Jan and Fiona have developed. And then, as has been mentioned, they'll have some sessions to follow up with you all later on the 16th of March and the 6th of April. Discovery is, it's a common sense approach to getting to know people or helping people get to know themselves before planning anything. It's an approach for spending time with people and learning this essential question: who is this person? Instead of testing and evaluating people. That's really what I was taught to do in the university. And so I always was yearning for something other than that. And discovery is one of those alternatives. It's a way of learning about what it is that people are interested in and how that can relate to work, what it is that people need to have in place to be at their best, who are their coworkers, what's the nature of the task, and so forth. We call that conditions. And what is it that people have to contribute, have to offer to businesses. And all of this with the idea, again, of preparing for job development. What are personal characteristics of a good, fulfilling job? This iceberg is a good analogy for what so often happens with people. That is information that's on the surface, just looking at a person, or just really basic information about a person, is used to make really important life decisions, often for that person. In social role valorization theory, we note that a common life experience for people with disabilities is where their disability becomes life-defining. And what we mean by that is this one aspect of a person's identity, their disability, is used to make all kinds of decisions about a person. For instance, related to what we're talking about, if the person will work, even if the person will work, and if they work, where will they work? What kind of work will he or she do? Who are the coworkers going to be? All of this, again, just having this very surface information about people. And so what discovery does is it recognizes there's so much more that needs to be known, a much deeper understanding of the person, their life experiences, their gifts, their talents, things that have been challenging, their vulnerabilities. Now, these are some characteristics that people have taught me through the years, professionals, people with disabilities, and their family members. Just the importance of beginning with the person and not the job. and finding ways to promote genuine contributive involvement through employment, rather than just settling for ideas of keeping people busy or keeping people happy. Testing these preconceived notions, this folklore, oftentimes it is around people, that everybody knows that Tim can't. And so discovery looks at flipping that and saying, well, are there circumstances where Tim can? Lori Norton, one of my colleagues at the university who teaches discovery, and she's really good at it too. She says it's all about thinking in questions. As soon as you get one question answered, you're thinking, well, what would that mean about something else? And then what else do I need to learn? And so it's this hunger, this appetite for learning more and more about what needs to be in place for a good job. We begin with familiar, just digging in. What does a person's life look like now? What's important to the person? Just a nice slice of what life looks like now, and then move toward novel and new experiences as part of discovery. Now, this next slide, I call 5 things to keep in mind about discovery. And actually, these go back to the very roots of Mark Gold and Associates and Mark Gold, the founder. So these are decades-old values that permeate everything we do at Mark Gold and Associates, and certainly discovery. And the first of these is that balanced relationships are always at the heart. That discovery isn't about doing things to people, or for people. It's about walking with people, alongside people, and experiencing as much as we can what they've been experiencing as that relates to work. Mark was just emphatic about the look of our presence with the people we're supporting, and the relationships always being balanced, not controlling. Another central idea of Marx was learning about what he called people's intrinsic interests, things that people do without being asked. He said, when teaching somebody a task that they find interesting, the motivation is built in. Therefore, learning about people's interests is one of the essential aspects of discovery. In keeping with this idea of balanced relationships, discovery is never a test. It never involves people proving readiness. Our assumption is that everybody is ready for employment if we are ready to know and understand the person. Now, it's true that all of us, everybody in this Zoom room, all human beings have vastly more growth potential than is ever realized. But this is exponentially true, especially true for people with developmental and intellectual disabilities, because all too often expectations have been so low. Suitably challenging things for people to do have been missing in their lives. And this idea about the importance of contribution, doing something that matters in human beings' lives, that opportunities for contribution feed us, feed our human spirit, and this is especially important for so many people with disabilities who have found so much of their lives on the receiving end of assistance, being denied the innate joy of doing something for other people. So, finding, fitting, suitably challenging, socially valued work provides one really important way of contributing, doing something for other people. When you change the way you look at things, the way you look at things changes. As is shown in this graphic, everyone can be correct in their assumptions. You know, it's like one guy's looking at this and saying, there are 3 boards. The other guy says, no, there's 4. It's like a MC Escher kind of a drawing here. But the point is that everybody can be right. You know, we've all witnessed this high cost of people with disabilities being captured by others' low expectations for their achievement. And if that's all that's ever believed about people, then sure enough, that can be right. But we've also seen people rise to the occasion and do some pretty remarkable things when high expectations are expressed. So that is equally possible and true. So in short, discovery is an alternative to standardized testing, or merely asking people what they want to do, or placement of people into some kind of predetermined readiness program or a predetermined job. So I want to just show some examples of things that discovery can replace, and things that have been replaced in my lifetime and work. After working as a special education high school teacher in the late 70s, I started work in a sheltered workshop. Now, this isn't the sheltered workshop I worked in, but for all the world, it could have been. These are pictures of another one. But I took my former students who had been sitting at home after they left school to the sheltered workshop with me. And the idea behind the sheltered workshop was certainly rooted in good intentions. And that is that it would help people who went there to get ready for work. But it did not. The problems of congregated and segregated programs were present. For instance, in the social role valorization theory theme of imitation and modeling, it highlights the importance of new workers being surrounded by skilled workers and for the new workers to imitate and the skill being learned. But at the sheltered workshop, there were no model workers who were adept at the task being performed. Everybody was surrounded by other people who were struggling to do the same tasks. Additionally, the tasks weren't necessarily a fit for anybody on my crew, and they all started with the job task, just something that would be available, assuming that anybody with a disability would be good at it or interested in doing it. The lack of challenging work was almost always absent, not to mention the embarrassingly low pay for the people on my crew. So this is an example of disability being life-defining. I mean, people showed up on my crew because they had a disability. Nothing else about them led them to be on my crew. So even though there were good intentions behind this, it's important to recognize it's just a flawed model for accomplishing what was desired. Now, we still have some of these kinds of programs in the US, but much more popular are these later versions I'm going to show you. So unquestionably, good intentions here This is a new kind of special work for people with disabilities that has emerged in the U.S., especially in the last 10 years or so. Special coffee shops. And in some ways, these are different than sheltered workshops, but in other ways, they're very much the same, perhaps not having all of the limitations of the sheltered workshop, but still many of them, such as starting with congregation and the lack of model workers who were adept at the task to be performed, starting with the job task, not the person, assuming the coffee work would be fitting for everyone with a disability. And that perhaps it will get people ready for integrated work where everybody else works. In other words, despite the good intentions, there's just so much of the old story about what should be the rightful place of people with disabilities. So much of the old story continues here. So this is a fairly recent special coffee shop that's opened in my state of Kentucky. I'm going to play this brief clip, and I want us just to listen to the rationale.
A Lexington pastor has had an idea brewing in the back of his head for a while, and now he has a team of 50 pouring their heart and soul into it.
They got joy, they got a heart, you know what I mean, and they just, they want to work.
McLeod's employees, or VIPs as he calls them, will be trained for every role at the coffee house.
Walker works at Jet's Pizzas, dishwasher. He loves dishwashing. I've got a Josiah. He's an artist, paints a lot like Miro. He cannot wait to sell Cokes.
At this restaurant,
the customer comes first.
But they also want the customer's time inside the shop to be eye-opening.
If Down syndrome or special needs make you nervous, then you probably need to come in here and relax and just treat them like anyone else.
The employees are excited to have a space that welcomes differently abled people. They're hoping McLeod's Coffee House inspires more businesses down the road and across the city.
We still want to have friends. We still want to do things. We still want to go out and, hang out with our friends, just do normal stuff.
Gaines is excited for her role behind the cash register. She's glad McLeod's is setting an example of what it means to be accessible, something she says other places around town need.
Ramps or wider open spaces, wider open walkways, accessible bathrooms.
For the manager, it's personal.
It allows me to have a place for them when they get older and they're able to work. Well, my son's having autism, that is something I'd be able to do.
The goal?
Everyone on Southern Drive, they just come over here for a good cup of coffee, hot chocolate, iced tea, Diet Coke, whatever we have. They meet Jeremy, and someone may stop me and go, Brewster, can you tell me about that, Jeremy? Could he give me 2 hours up at the gas station?
To show the community that people with special needs aren't that different, and they deserve a safe place to work too. In Lexington, Shelby Lofton, WKYT.
So discovery instead of special coffee shops. Now, in watching this, I think it's fair to say there are some benefits for people. It's not that there are no benefits at all. But I would say that the costs are pretty high. I can't help but thinking if we learned with somebody in the process of discovery that working in a coffee shop would be fitting employment, I just have to wonder what it would be like if you were approaching a coffee shop down the road from Brewster's. What the coffee shop owner would say if approached. She might say, "Oh, didn't you know that there's a coffee shop for them down the street?" So even though there are benefits, we need to take stock of the messages being sent to the general public on news clips like this, conveying that people with disabilities need special places to work, that people with disabilities need to work together, and that they all like the same kinds of work. So one of the other things that I've seen happen is that we really can use discovery in schools instead of what happens so much in the US, which is predetermined work transition sites for students. This is what we call work transition in the US. I think it may be what you all call work experience. And what I'm describing happens lots of places. And it's a regimented kind of idea of placing students somewhat arbitrarily in a variety of predetermined businesses to do work, typically entry-level work, often high turnover, low status work, and usually without pay. But the idea is that this will give students some transition work experience to see what they may like. So things like, just have an arrangement with a grocery store to do stocking, bag groceries, stuff in a grocery store. That would be a common one. Another one we see a lot of is doing custodial work. Boy, working in fast food like McDonald's, really popular, in maybe multiple fast food places like Burger King, I think Hungry Jack's where y'all live. So too often this is what happens in the US. And then when it comes to asking students where they want to work, if they haven't had a good experience, it's almost like teaching students that they don't want to work, that they don't like work, just because they haven't liked the arbitrary job rotation. So again, discovery helps us think about, instead of starting with the job, how would you start with the student in something that's likely to be of interest from what you've learned? Likely would be a way that the student could, contribute their talents, put the conditions in place for the student to be successful and to be in as highly valued a job as possible. So the problem here is that what the school districts are desiring is really good, but their practice of approaching it this way is not going to get them what they're after, nor the students. So some of these lessons learned through discovery, I think, are illustrations of the old story and the potential peril of not using discovery. These instances of people with disabilities being congregated and segregated, doing tasks that aren't fitting or interesting or challenging, getting bored with it, receiving low pay, or even in those work transition examples I named, no pay. Getting readiness, simulations or approximations of work instead of getting the real thing, real work, real employment. Arbitrary placements, performing low status tasks without regard for interest or fit for a student. And getting results from assessments of what's been learned in these kinds of places that have varied interpretation, and they're often used to unfairly predict what might be possible or potential in the future. And even in the US, we'll ask students after they finish high school, do you want to work? And if their work transition hasn't been engaging or interesting to them, they may say no. And off to a day program they go. So this is really, this stuff has a lot of consequences. Experiencing just the low and limiting expectations by other people or even family members. So I want to pause here for a moment and just ask you all to think about this and reply in chat. Indicate if these circumstances have affected the person of your focus. Yes, no, or unsure. And if you wish, you can share an example in chat. So if you just want to take a few minutes and answer the question, have these kinds of dynamics described on this slide been a problem? Yes, no, or unsure. And if you would like to share an example. Okay, lots of yeses. And even after being in a wonderfully inclusive setting, my daughter was approached to participate in a readiness program in school, which meant that she'll miss her usual academic learning. So it wasn't set up in a way to maximize learning and work experience. Lots of yeses. People have seen this. Shocked to discover recently that if you have an IQ below a certain level, you automatically qualify for a direct support professional in Australia. Yeah, this is another interesting kind of dynamic that knowing that one aspect of somebody defines what they would get or what they would need. Lots of yeses. Being asked for my son to have an IQ test to determine eligibility. Yes, frequently. Yeah, I've seen this stuff inside the US, certainly, but outside as well. Career person at school, ask what job career you want to do when fires back lots of options versus what do you think would be, what do you think would be a good idea? Yes, tried various jobs for free, never translated into paid work experience, low expectations of school and individual. Oh, DSP, disability pension. Okay, thank you. Child in year 10, starting school down path of work readiness, focused on their interests, passions, etc., before even thinking about where to go for work experience. Quite happy with the way it's going. Okay, excellent, very good. It's good to know when good things are happening too. A TAFE teacher saying of a person, I don't think they'll be able to work in the industry. What is TAFE? Somebody help me with that.
The TAFE.
Okay, TAFE. And what does that mean?
It's just I think you would relate it to a community college over there.
Okay, right. Okay, yeah, community college, right, okay. The school demanding to know the IQ with severe limited disabilities to move to life skills. So this disability being life defining is so powerful. I mean, the way people end up in the transition programs, the way they end up in special coffee shops, sheltered workshops. Yes, currently no limited support at school for work experience readiness programs. Daughter's put in a sheltered workshop, asked to paint sticks. She's very capable and was bored and left. Yeah, not able to start, let alone complete an IQ test is the ultimate reduction of expectancies. Okay, thank you. Okay. Donor support unit, not even given the option of work. All right. So thank you for your information there. And I think it's not good news, but that these kinds of dynamics are just present everywhere. I mean, social role valorization theory would define it as saying it's part of the consequence of social devaluation and what follows. But that's not to say nothing can be done about it. And now and certainly I'm not saying that discovery is the answer to social devaluation, but it is a way to address some aspects of it related to work and getting a good foothold in work. So let's take a look at some of the process now. So there are three primary ways of learning information and discovery that I'm going to describe now. And the first is focused time with the person. So what does a familiar day look like for you? How do you spend your time? What are your chores you perform at home? Are there chores and responsibilities at home that you even like doing that you would do without being asked? What are things that you're especially good at doing at home or at school or just in the community at large? What are your hobbies that you do with yourself or by yourself or with others? Do you have regular routines that are important in your life and associated with others? Are there things that you really enjoy doing and you need some assistance from others to do them? What are those things? So that's the first point. Then the second one is, after getting really grounded in what does life look like now? What kinds of things work well? What kinds of things don't? What seem to be some interests? And how might those relate to work? Then we try some novel activities, some new things based on what's been learned and what's been positive, just stretching possibilities a bit. So here we're looking at trying some novel activities, things based on what was learned during familiar activities. So I'll give you an example. Last year, I was mentoring a job coach, and the young man she was working with in Discovery had this uncanny ability with claw machines that are in arcades. So I have an illustration here. These claw machines, this isn't the young man, it's just a stock photo. But these claw machines where the claw goes down and you work handles and you try to pull out an item. Well, he had this uncanny ability to be able to do that with a claw machine. and to very often get the intended item, which isn't something that most people can do. So it's a unique skill for sure. But she needed to think about, so I wonder what we could try as a novel activity, kind of a translation of that. And so one of the things that she decided to try was drone flying, because whereas operating a claw machine isn't a marketable skill that I know of, like drone flying might be. And so that was something that they tried together. And sure enough, drone flying was something that came pretty naturally for this young man. So that would be an example of a novel activity based on something that was learned in just everyday life activities. The second primary way of learning is by talking with other people. And so, you know, one of the things we do in Discovery is, if you're not a family member and doing Discovery in the role that I've been, is you ask names of people who would have ideas and insights about the way this person of focus could contribute and have involvement in typical and valued functions of everyday life. And so, you know, this could be former teachers, people from the faith community, neighbors, friends, whatever. And so ideas, you know, will come from the person you're working with in Discovery, or their family or their friends. And of course, if you're not the family member and you're the person responsible for coordinating Discovery, then you always need the person's permission before talking with other people. So the first way of getting information is focus time with the person in existing or novel ways. And then the second way is talking with people, interviewing people. And then the third way of learning is to get permission to review records. Now, it's important to be discerning in this review of records, because very often human service records and school records are slanted more toward deficits. So one of the things I recommend to people, other than family members doing Discovery, is that they ask for the records a little later on in the process, because as much as we may think we wouldn't be unduly influenced by others' low expectations, we may be. So I recommend waiting a bit on this. But that being said, it still is important to see what kind of information can be gained from records, including just what people's life experiences have been, including the struggles and hardships and their vulnerabilities. But as well, you may find other people you'd want to ask to interview, who've been a really important part of the person having valued life experiences and being, you know, challenging the person. And you may learn of all kinds of things that have gone well for the person. And what have those been? Things that may have just been missed somehow in other conversations with the person you're working with in Discovery, or their family, or other people you've talked with. So those are the three primary ways of getting information: time with the person, talking with other people, and later on in the process, record review. So now we want to take a look at the three things that we're aiming to learn in Discovery: conditions, interests, contributions. So I'll take these one at a time and say a little bit about them. Conditions: what needs to be in place for this person to be at his or her best? And so some examples of conditions. What is the nature of the activities and tasks that somebody's doing? So some people prefer doing tasks that they're engaged with other people. And some people would prefer to do tasks where they're working with things. So task with people, or task with things, or a combination, or it doesn't matter, you know. Some people do better with tasks that have really clear parameters, things that are done or not done. Other people do better with tasks that have a range of correctness. So what's the nature of the task? What kinds of settings or environmental features work well for a person? You know, some people work better in smaller, like well-defined areas. Some people need a certain level of climate control for health or comfort or focus or productivity. Some people can only function in very orderly kinds of environments, whereas other people can do just fine in chaotic environments. So what is it about the setting that's important for people? I mean, some people really have a hard time working where there are fluorescent light fixtures. So anyhow, the setting, it's just really important to pay attention to characteristics of setting while you're getting to know people in discovery. Now, this is a really important one, people in social situations. Who are people's coworkers? How old are they? What are their personalities like? So some people function especially well with people in their own age group, and others do just fine with people of multiple ages. Some people want to work primarily with men or women. Some people, it doesn't matter. Some people work fine as long as they have consistent people. And some people especially need a consistent workforce so that other people can understand what needs to be in place for people to be successful. But some people, it's okay to have different people on different shifts, a lot of different people, different coworkers. Some people do really well with fast type A moving kind of people, whereas other people need coworkers who are more quiet, reflective types. So this is really, really important to understand. What about routines and rituals? Some people like performing a variety of tasks where the demands are different every day, whereas some people want a really standard routine where there's really very little variation from day to day. The timing and the pacing of the work can be really important. Some people can get work done really precisely just right every time, but production is something that can't be that important. Getting it done correctly needs to be important. For other people, production and getting things done quickly is not a problem at all. Learning and support strategies, like, some people really like working independently. Some people really like working with a small group or a small team. Some people will do really well learning from a mentor who's experienced in the work. This is really common, whereas other people would prefer to read and study on their own. Some people have become just enculturated and accustomed to this idea of getting praise for everything they do, to the extent that absence of praise is interpreted by the person as failure. And so, as a matter of fact, one of the people that I'm mentoring in Discovery now, this is true for her learning partner. So it's something that really is important to pay attention to in terms of what that's going to look like, what work is going to look like for people later on. And so the final characteristic we've talked about, conditions. The next is interests, and so we want to look at interest in the broadest possible kind of term. And we're not just initially looking at interests as they relate to work, although we want to get there eventually. We want to learn about all kinds of interests that people have in their lives related to hobbies, whether they'd want that to be related to work or not. Just what kinds of things make people tick? Like Mark talked about, intrinsic interest. What kinds of things do people do without being asked? So, this is one just really, really important thing, because so often, like contributions, the interest of people with disabilities have so often been minimized, ignored, or trivialized. People's interests have been deemed as unrealistic, like in the absence of understanding of what people really have in mind. So, for example, someone may say she wants to be a doctor. And it may be true that the impact of her disability would make completing requirements to become a doctor not possible. So while we certainly wouldn't want to promise her, oh, I'll help you become a doctor, we also wouldn't want to shut her down by saying, that's unrealistic. A more respectful, discovery-like response would be to say, that's interesting. I'd like to learn more about that. Why it is that being a doctor, that kind of work, what is it about being a doctor that's interesting to you? And it's not just a question to ask, but I'd like to explore that more with you, because perhaps she has many doctors in the family and she just wants to follow this pattern. And maybe the family members could be possible connections to find suitably challenging other work in the medical field. Or maybe she just likes the status of the work in the medical field. Maybe it's trappings, uniforms, scrubs, that kind of thing. So all of this would be part of learning with people in discovery. But we can't just rely on asking people what they want to do. As a matter of fact, as a question we recommend not asking people because so often that becomes just a loaded question that people really don't have information to answer adequately. You know, maybe they'll just say something that an idea that somebody has planted in them before, or maybe it would be something that they've just had, you know, just a flighting instance of an idea. But instead, you know, what we're really interested in learning is, I'd like to learn about things that you enjoy doing and you do well. And let's just start with that. Yeah, so one of the ways is to look at things a person does on her own without request from others. And especially, you know, we're seeking interests that are typical for age, gender, and culture that are most highly valued. So this point relates to social role valorization theory, especially one of its principles called the culturally valued analog. What is it that happens for people of the same age and gender in this particular venue of life? And so it also relates to the conservatism corollary, one of the themes of social role valorization theory, in terms of looking at the range of possibilities and always starting with the most highly valued feasible option within the whole range of possibilities. Given that the person's strongest contribution, are there particular interests that should be explored in that area? And then this last, this point, the second to the last point, includes, you know, often requires exploration and translating what's already known into new possibilities. And keeping in mind that interests can often be kind of tiny, subtle little things, and they're things that people won't tell you about. Maybe nobody, but you see it, you know. They can be very subtle and specific interests, and sometimes even contradictions based on other things that you have learned with the person. So we've talked about conditions and interests, and now contributions. That should say 3. It says 2, I'm sorry. Contributions is where we're looking at all of this stuff, you know. This is a really important category because often it's been inaccurately assumed that people with disabilities don't have really very much to contribute, or they've been captured in this position where they're routinely having things done for them without having a chance to contribute to other people. So there are all these subtitles that are really, really important. Now, this whole section of skills that you notice people having and you observe, just all this, you know, all of these things that people do, that's a really important, it's a whole section of one of the parts of discovery. But we're also paying attention to people's personality and how that can be a contribution to a business. You know, want to be sure that if somebody has this really terrific personality, that they're working someplace where that's important. Credentials that they have, that they've earned over time, just their life experiences and getting through things has taught them a lot, and how that can be a contribution to work. You know, other people they know, resources that they may have, very specific knowledge, you know, in an area of life, or this really strong passion for something has to be done just so. You know, around a social justice issue or something, how could that relate to work with other people who share that passion? So, you know, one of the things that's just so important to get grounded in discovery is we're wanting to find things that aren't just on the surface. You know, it's not a psychosocial to find out what exists right now. We want to know what exists right now, but so that we can look beyond at possibilities that previously haven't been considered. One of the professionals whom I've learned a lot from and studied with in discovery is Siva Shumper. She's an associate with Mark Golden Associates. I went to a workshop, this is more than 20 years ago, that Siva did on discovery, and I traveled to Mississippi to see it. And this is something she just said offhand. And I wrote it down right away because I thought it was so important. It really resonated with me. This is what she said. The people you see every day can be the hardest people to get to know. And so, for example, from time to time, I get to mentor professionals in discovery, and the organizations that they work for now are running sheltered workshops or day programs, and they're looking at moving away from that. But the learning partner or the focus of the person's discovery, the person they're working with in discovery, is somebody who works at that sheltered workshop or day program where this staff person that I'm mentoring works. And so I always talk about the Siva quote, Siva Shumpert quote with them, because I said, I think you're in a difficult position now, because it may really be challenging to think beyond what it is that you think you've already learned about a person's behaviors and action and potential, beyond what you've seen just in these four walls with this group of people doing this kind of stuff. So one thing is you're going to have to get out of these walls, to learn new things, but you also are going to really need to open your mind to be able to think about things that you haven't seen. And I do think it's a challenge, has been for me. I'll give you an example shortly. And so, I just, this is another point where I just wanted to pause and have y'all think about this particular point for a few minutes. And so, Fiona's going to send you all off to breakout rooms to think about this for a few minutes, to consider what Siva means by this statement. Have you seen examples before? And what could be ways of addressing the challenge that she raises here? What I want to do now is show my story, my first experience in discovery. And I want to tell you a bit about this because it was quite a lesson for me. So Tim was a young man I'd met while he was a high school student. And the agency that I directed, the Supported Employment Agency or Open Employment Agency, was called Community Employment. And we'd been asked by the high school where I used to teach to help set up a work transition program. Tim was a student in the class that I used to teach. He hadn't been my student because I'd been gone for some years, but he was in the special ed, self-contained special ed class that I used to teach at the high school. And so we helped set up a job placement in a work transition program that was at a small mom and pop grocery called Shaw's Grocery. And they wanted to be involved with the school in the partnership on this work transition initiative. And so I think in terms of the school's needs, it was very positive. But in terms of Tim's needs, it really wasn't great. It turned out really to be quite limiting for him. These were some things that we learned from Tim's experience at Shaw's Grocery. He's one of these people for whom we said, and it was said, that he would always need a job coach. Sure, Tim can work, but he's always going to have a human service person with him. And we came to this conclusion because we noticed that he needed continuous supervision or prompts from the job coach to stay on the job. And his jobs were like rotating stock, like switching around the cans on the shelf to put the new cans in the back and the old cans up front, sweeping the floor and tearing down boxes. Tim wasn't doing this without somebody staying with him to do it. It was said that he had a short attention span, one of the reasons that he needed the prompts. And we were a little concerned he wouldn't watch for cars when crossing the road. I mean, we had to almost hold hands with him to cross the road safely. And that he liked to talk a lot, and it was really kind of getting in the way of his work and sometimes annoying other people and so forth. So, things weren't looking real great for Tim. Now, this was 1987. And I was offered a job right after this, the beginning of 1988, at the University of Kentucky. to begin teaching people about supported employment. And it was just a really tremendous opportunity to meet leaders and developers in the field of I keep saying supported employment. You all call it open employment. I'm sorry, open employment. It was a time for reading and study and learning. And one of the things, most important things that I got to learn about was social role valorization theory. I went to my first workshop, my first passing evaluation based on social role valorization theory. And boy, did I find it to be challenging, but it was also compelling. I came to understand the complexity of having a disability, and why it was so difficult to help people find jobs. And it didn't have to do with the people. It had to do with our society and our world. And so just understanding these dynamics of social devaluation and where that comes from was really important to me. Why is it so difficult for people with disabilities to get good jobs? And the more I learned, the more my appetite was to learn more. And fortunately, I was in a place to be able to attend lots of events and study a great deal about social role valorization theory. Mark Gold really was the person who had piqued my curiosity about work for people with disabilities in the first place. When I'd been a high school special education teacher in the 70s, I'd heard of Mark's work and had some exposure to it. And so this was a time where I could really dig into it. And so the projects sponsored multiple Kentucky workshops around Mark's work, who tragically died really just when I was getting started in open employment. He died at the end of 1982. But the work continued. And Mike Callahan, whom you see in this photo with Scott, the photo on the right, took over for Mark after Mark's untimely death in 1982 as president of Mark Gold and Associates. And 1988 just turned out to be a real banner year for second generation open employment issues. And Mike had written this book. And I remember reading through all of these books at the university while I was trying to prepare this curriculum, and I couldn't put this one down. It was just so compelling. And one of the things that it talked about was development of what was called a vocational profile. It was the precursor of discovery, and it was introduced in this book in 1988. And I got in touch with Mike to come help me in Kentucky, and he did. And it's where I learned about discovery, although it wasn't known as discovery at that point. It was known as the vocational profile. What an exciting idea, I thought, because it was always this thing, how do you know what a good job would be for somebody? And finally, there was a process other than testing people, which never told me very much, or just asking people what they wanted to do, knowing that that was the wrong question, or an insufficient question at least. So, after working at the university for a few years and teaching about supported or open employment and learning from all of these people, I became really restless because I learned all these things that I'd never done myself. And I was anxious to get back into the work. So I returned to the work of open employment and I started my own business. And guess who my first referral was? It was Tim. The guy that I had placed in the grocery store and discovered all of these, or not discovered, but had become convinced of all of these very limiting ideas, that he was always going to need a job coach. He needed somebody with him all the time. He had a short attention span. His talking would cause other people to distance themselves and so forth. And so now I had an opportunity to have a clean slate, a clean piece of paper. And I needed to know that some of my former ideas were going to be hard to get rid of. And I just needed to recognize that right off the bat and do my best. But I needed to resolve this issue of why does Tim always need a job coach? That's just not going to work for any of us in the long term. And so this meeting in Tim's living room with Tim and his mom to talk with them about working with Tim on a vocational profile, what it was called then. And, I just remembered that all this stuff about the job coach. And so I had to start asking myself the question, why would this be needed? And under what circumstances would it not be needed? Now, Tim just kind of came in and out of the room a lot. His mom was there all the time, and she said, yeah, I think what you're talking about sounds really good. And I said, yeah, I do too. I said, I'm really sorry about the grocery store thing when Tim was a student. That wasn't the right way to go about it. But I've learned some new ways, and I really think this could be a benefit to Tim and to the business community. But Tim would come in and talk about wanting to work, and his mom would say, Milton wants to help you get a job, a good job this time. And he would go rattling off all of these different places he wanted to work. And I couldn't see any theme with him, but I knew he had a strong work ethic, but I didn't know how to narrow that down. And I knew that was going to be one of the things I was going to need to do. Now, his sister came in at one point, his sister named Cookie, who was a little younger than Tim. She was still a high school student at this point. And she complained to me about Tim. And she said, is there something you can do to get him to stop taking my stuff apart? And I said, well, what are you talking about, Cookie? She said, well, he gets my VCRs and he takes them apart. And sometimes they can't be put back together. And so he's ruining my stuff. Is there something you can do about that? And I said, no, I don't know, but I appreciate you sharing that with me, Cookie. So these ideas, these things I learned about starting with the person, not the job, challenging conventional wisdom, what it is that I believed and other people believed about Tim, watching for a spark, helped me think about a new set of emerging questions. There are bound to be circumstances when Tim does sit still, in addition to disassembling his sister's VCR. What are conditions in which Tim is attentive to dangers around him? What needs to be in place for Tim to be safe? What are his interests and talents? I did not know. Who are other people who would be interested in Tim finding new stories? What brings out the employee in Tim? These were some of my new questions, because what I'd started with were these very limiting questions. And so what I'd like to do now is, this is just a chat exercise I'd like you all to think about on your own. And that is this question: can you think of similar limiting examples of conventional wisdom, or maybe folklore, affecting the person of your focus? What are some questions that could test these assumptions? So if you would write in chat, if you can think of, like, what is a negative assumption that's been held? And what might be a question that could be asked to reframe this, just kind of like the kind of thing, that I was thinking about with this reframing of questions for Tim. This kind of stuff is what I'm asking for. What's the conventional wisdom, things that people believe to be true, and how could that be challenged? So the myth is all young people with Down syndrome want to work in hospitality. Right. So what is the question challenging that? Where else might people like to work, right? Okay, can't do more than one thing a day. All right. So yeah, so the reframing of that might be, what are circumstances when he could do more than one thing, a day? When have we seen that happen? People with autism all want to do IT and programming. People with autism are aggressive. People who are nonverbal can't communicate. Right. So, how do people communicate in other aspects of their life? If you're nonverbal, you're not intelligent or capable. It would be too dangerous to have you in a workplace. Right. Right. So how do people communicate in a way, what needs to be in place for people to be safe and all of that kind of thing? So thank you. Thank you for that. That's the idea. These things either generally, some of these examples you all gave were examples around a particular kind of disability, but often they also are framed around a particular person. as I had contributed to with Tim. Oh, the people don't understand social cues. Just had a teacher say to my son, I know you can't do that because of your disability. Yeah, so this is powerful stuff. We've got to find a way to get past. So the first thing, just like we talked about, is beginning with familiar aspects of life. So I just started off by asking Tim and his mom, what are some things that you're good at doing and you enjoy doing, and can I join you doing that? And so Tim didn't say anything, but his mom said, Tim, this weekend, Tim is going to do weed trimming around our back fence, and I'm going to have him plant some flowers. And he really likes doing yard work like that. And I said, terrific, Tim, could I join you? I'll even help you if you show me what to do. And so that's what we did. So I've got to say, I was pretty amazed to watch Tim take that weed trimmer and systematically go around and cut the long grass around the fence. And so I thought about that. I wonder, what is it about that task that he's doing, and he sticks with it? So that gave me something to think about. And then we got to the flower bed, and Tim dug little holes and planted the flowers and showed me how to do it. And I did it with him too. I thought, what is it about that? How come that's working so well and the stuff at Shaw's Grocery wasn't? That gave me lots of stuff to be thinking about. And his mom said this, Tim does all the grocery shopping. And I thought, wow, I wonder what that means. I mean, when I think of him doing all the grocery shopping, I'm thinking, maybe she drops him off because Tim didn't drive and goes in and he comes back with all the groceries. But I said, that'd be really great for me to see how Tim does grocery shopping. And I said, how do you all go about it? She said, well, I give him a list and he gets everything. And I thought, man, that would be really good to see. And so sure enough, they gave us a list and I went grocery shopping with Tim, and he did know where things were. And, one of the things that I was concerned about in the grocery with Tim was he was one of these guys who would move around real fast and kind of sporadically sometimes. And I thought, man, what's that grocery cart going to look like with other people around? And that with that big, tall display of Velveeta cheese on aisle 6, is it going to be safe with Tim? And you know what? I saw that Tim was really attentive to how we moved that cart around. That was really good for me to see. And that he knew he could read some of the items on the grocery list, but not all of them. And some of them he'd asked me to help him out with a bit. And he knew where they were in the store. He remembered where they were. And, I got to see if he had any experience doing price comparison, got to see what it was like for him to do stuff at checkout. We talked about it ahead of time. How do you do this, and manage it? What do you do? What does your mom do? So that would go well for him. And so all kinds of stuff, I could learn from that. And then I started thinking about some novel things based on what I had learned with Tim doing familiar things. And so these are pre-planned things. They're not spontaneous. You plan them, you arrange them, you create things that you think have a good likelihood of going well and being positive experiences. They're not a test. It's not like, I want to see if Tim can do this. It's an exploration to see what it looks like and see if you can grab onto something a little bit different. And so these were some things that we did. So I had some shop lights that I wanted to rewire for my garage. And, I was kind of interested in this mechanical interest that Tim had. And so I said, hey, Tim, I got to rewire some shop lights. How about I bring them over to your front porch and we do it together? He said, great. So I got to see Tim strip wire, with a wire stripper. I got to see him. I would demonstrate one and hand it over and he would do one. I got to see him, thread the wires into the receptacle and tighten them down, on the light fixture, and the same thing for the plug. He wasn't moving around. He was right there doing it, And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. I said, Tim, where'd you learn how to use a screwdriver and a wire stripper? Sure looks like you've done this before. He goes, oh, I don't know. And so I couldn't get any answer to that. And then I was really interested in this next one, not because I thought Tim would be a data entry person, but I was still looking at this question, when does Tim not move around a lot? And he was always talking about computers. And I thought, well, I wonder what it looks like to do something on a computer. I wonder whether he has any experience. I didn't have one at home. And this is, 1991. So it's not like everybody had a computer like they do now. So the guy who took my job at Community Employment, I knew was working on a new database. And I asked Barry if I could come over and look at how they did it. And so I did. And he showed me how to do it. And he knew I was helping Tim look for a job. And I said, Tim's always talking about computers. And I just want to see what it looks like if he'd be interested in learning how to do this data entry task. So basically, I had learned that Tim didn't know a lot about the keyboard and stuff. So I just did match the sample. See a B on the sheet, find the B on the keyboard, touch it, see it on the screen. If you don't see it, if you see something else, hit backspace and go back. So it just matched the sample, correct error, and I demonstrated it. But here's what I learned. He sat there for an hour and a half. I said, all right, time to go. Thanks, Tim, So I knew then that if something was really engaging to him, really interesting to him, that he could do it for an extended period of time. That didn't tell me he was going to do data entry or necessarily work with computers, although I did see he was interested in them. Then this was the next thing that I tried. And this was an introduction to his neighbor, Bill, standing next to his Volkswagen van. And so I've had a couple of these, and I've had a bunch of Volkswagens back in the day. And Bill was my genius mechanic to know how to fix all of them. And he lived 5 doors down from Tim. So I found out that Bill and Tim had never met, but Bill knew what I did for a living. And I said, I'm helping this young man just down the road from you. And I think he has some mechanical ability, but you know that I don't. And I'm just wondering if, you could show him around some stuff at your shop, or if there's something he could help you fix sometime. And Bill said, I'm rebuilding a lawnmower. If Tim would like to come down and help me rebuild the lawnmower, that'd be great. And I'll tell you how it goes, or you can join us, whatever. So initially I did join them. And, there were things Bill needed done around the shop, and I would quit watching and go help Bill out and do some things. And then over time, they would just meet on their own and work on the lawnmower. But here's what I learned. I got back with Bill and I said, so how's it going? And he said, yeah, he's doing fine. He said, where did you learn how to use tools? And I said, I don't know. I don't know if it's innate or somebody's shown him. I just really don't know. But you think he's good at that? And he said, yeah, I think he is. He said, sometimes he gets a little bit in a hurry, and he tore a gasket once, but it's no big deal. I said, yeah. He said, I think you're right. He said, I think he has some ability here. So through all of these experiences, including ones that I didn't go through here, I was thinking about what are Tim's interests, conditions, and contributions. So a huge interest and contribution was this mechanical, electrical assembly or disassembly. And one of the things that I figured out from the weed eating and the flower planting and the data entry and the stuff he was doing with Bill was that Tim did well with tasks that had clear parameters, whether things were done or not done, and things that were real fuzzy in terms of when they're done or not done, in terms of this endless shelf of stock to rotate, in terms of sweeping a floor and when's the floor clean. He didn't do really great at those kinds of things. That the job shouldn't have excessive downtime because he's somebody who really wants to stay with it all the time. Not something other people would see as easy, because there would be other people like me who would look at Tim and think he couldn't do anything very hard. So that was one of the conditions of the work, something that would be suitably challenging and also look challenging. The talking should be part of the job because Tim, he did like to talk a lot. It needed a small, consistent group of coworkers who could help him watch for danger. That's how we figured that one out. So people like, it couldn't be a high turnover job. Small company, consistent group of coworkers who could explain dangers to Tim. Needed to be a work culture where employees are flexible and laid back. Job needed to be close to home so his mom could take him to work, because she worked a couple of different jobs just to kind of keep things going. She was a single mom. And his contributions, this innate mechanical ability, this strong work ethic, this physical energy, and just what a wonderful guy, this completely authentic, transparent, genuine person. So I'm going to fast forward here to a job planning meeting. This is where we decide where conditions, interest, and contributions, where the rubber meets the road, where these kinds of ideas gets translated into tasks and companies that need these tasks. So I want to do another kind of let's try this thing. We'll do this together. We're going to look at what was learned with Tim about conditions, interest, and contributions. And I'm really fast forwarding to the last part of this job planning meeting, where we look at how those relate to tasks and how the tasks relate to businesses and connections. And so we're just going to do this as a group. And again, we're jumping in at the tail end of a meeting, a job planning meeting, which usually lasts about 90 minutes. And that's where I would be describing and having Tim help me describe these kinds of things we've done in discovery. What we've learned needs to be in place for him to be at his best in terms of the kinds of tasks, the people, things he's good at doing and interested in doing, and so forth. So what we do in this is we look at these interest, conditions, and contributions, and then we think about how they relate to tasks. So I'm going to tell you all what was learned, with Tim in just a minute. But first, I'm just interested in this kind of idea of the end of a planning meeting. And if you all would have any ideas for Tim, like that he's good at mechanical assembly and disassembly, the tasks, look like this, the people look like this, these are contributions he has. So for instance, one of the things that came to mind was just what he'd been doing. There are businesses that tear down lawnmowers with 2-cycle and 4-cycle engines and rebuild them. So who might be a business that does that, and who might a contact person be? So that's what I'm thinking about. So Tim's not going to get a job anywhere in Australia, but I bet you all could think of tasks that also meet these conditions, interest, and contributions, and a business and a contact person. That's all. Let's just do a few of these.
I put in the chat like electronics recyclers. Where do the electronics?
Okay. I'm sorry. I wasn't looking at the chat. Yeah, electronics recyclers. Good, so Susan. Okay,
organizations that take those things apart.
Yeah. Okay. Do you know a company that does that?
Not in my city, but I know of one in another city. Yeah.
Okay. What's the name of it?
Oh, that's challenging my midlife.
Okay.
Memory, Milton. It may come.
Oh, that's okay. Does anybody else know the name of that? That's a really good idea. An electronics recycler where they tear down computers and stuff. OfficeWorks recycles electronics. Okay, thanks, Katie.
Yeah, wherever they go after that, we drop them off.
And then so let me ask you this, Katie. Do you know somebody who works at OfficeWorks? Not in recycling even, but just who works at OfficeWorks?
I don't, but I go to my local one very often, so could probably go up there, and I would probably be a familiar face, at least to the people there.
Okay, great. All right, perfect. Thanks, Katie. Good seeing you too.
Yes,
okay, and let's see, working at Still Services repairs for garden tools. Okay, thanks, Kathy. So do you know somebody at Still Services? You don't. Okay. All right. But maybe somebody else in the room would know somebody there. And it's not essential to have a contact, because you can always, operate without a contact. It's just good to have a contact if you can find one. So anyhow, I'm going to move on, but this is the idea. You all see how that works, the job planning meeting? And so you're saying, what is a task that would fit these conditions? All of them, the intersection of conditions, interest, and contributions. And what is a business? And does somebody know somebody who works there? TikTok lesson on mower rebuilding. Okay. Yeah, but you could learn a bit about it there, couldn't you? The things you can learn on YouTube and TikTok. All right, so let's move on, because I do want to have time for y'all to do a bit of practice with your person of focus also. That's what I'm aiming for here. Okay. So we had I'll go back to this. We had a small meeting for Tim. We came up with small appliance repair, auto parts assembly or disassembly, full tool fabrication, and came up with these 3 businesses and contacts. And so, it wasn't found at those 3 places, But they were interested in what I was talking about. And I said, well, so you don't have anything here. Do you know of another company? And sometimes they did, and I would explore those other companies. But eventually I met a dead end, and it just didn't happen. So I went back to my SRV roots, and I said, so how is it that people find jobs? Well, it's through networking, like we're doing in the job planning meeting. But another way to do networking would be with the Chamber of Commerce. And I was a member of the Oldham County Chamber of Commerce. And so I went to the director and I said, look, I'm assisting a young man to look for work. You know what I do for a living. And he seems to have these excellent mechanical abilities. I told him a bit about Tim working with Bill. And I'm looking for some kind of mechanical assembly where there'd be a small group of consistent coworkers with a laid back kind of feel, preferably in Buckner, Kentucky, this little tiny town in out with the cows. And I said, we'd need mature coworkers who would have high expectations and take a personal interest in Tim's success. Do you know anybody like that? And he said, I do. There's a company called Product Handling Equipment Incorporated. It's a small family-owned conveyor company. They sell conveyors internationally. Are you aware of them? And I said, no, I'm not. So anyhow, I found out about them and I visited and I learned about, I talked to the owner of the company and about getting to spend some time there. And sure enough, there were 6 production workers. They'd been there. It was a family-owned business. Now, there weren't other family members who worked there, but the people, it was kind of like a small family. And I was talking to the owner about Tim, and he said, well, look around, see if there's some stuff here that you think would be a fit. And this one operation that's shown here, they called making it chain. It's like part of the innards, part of the inner workings of a conveyor system. And I said, well, that looks really interesting. I could see Tim learning to do that. Could somebody who typically teaches this job show me how they teach the job? And 2 people did. Robert, who you see sitting behind Tim on the riveting machine, and also Debbie did. And I could really envision Tim connecting with Robert. And I said, boy, I think it'd be terrific if Robert could teach Tim this job, if all this ends up working out. And I'll be here to be sure things go okay. But I'm not that mechanically inclined, and it'd be better for Robert to show him than me. And so sure enough, Tim ended up working there. And the very first task he had, not the only one he learned, but the first subassembly he learned was making this subassembly. And he'd take a board of these subassemblies. You can see he's made a whole row of them there, and he places them on a board and takes them to Robert, and Robert rivets them. And then Tim does more. He quit talking all the time. Go figure. I mean, I told people, I said, well, Tim talks a lot, and so that's just kind of part of how he gets around. But he quit talking all the time. He was there. You had to make Tim take a break, Anyhow, so these were some learnings that I found really helpful from that experience. Before and after story. Now, we both were different people because it was 4 years later. But I was more a different person than Tim was. Now, sure, he was a few years older and matured a bit. But I was really the person who changed because in 1987, I had a job placement mentality. Start with the job, not the person. Start with an available job. Put somebody in it. Nice people work there at Shaw's Grocery. That wasn't enough. Nice people. But that was my mentality. But after, in 1991, I devoted time to know Tim and understand him, how he got around in the world. What are his interests? What are his talents? What are his conditions for success? Shaw's Grocery, arbitrary, open-ended tasks without any connection to something Tim would be interested in. Product handling equipment, mechanical task, where it's clear when a task is completed or finished. You got the row of, in this subassembly, you've got the row of chain finished. You're through with that row. Do another one. Job coach or employment specialist provided all of the training and support. So at Shaw's Grocery, it was me or somebody else all of the time. At product handling equipment, it was the person who typically taught the job. and they did just fine. So I was there, for a period of time to be sure everything got humming and working well and all of that. And, Tim needed some help getting to know people, and I helped with introductions and what happens at break and, be sure people know each other and all of that. But I do an ounce of training. I didn't do a bit in terms of teaching Tim to assemble conveyor systems. So at Shaw's Grocery, I wanted there to be nice people there, but relationships were a secondary consideration. And at Product Handling Equipment, they were a primary consideration. One of the most important things. So what I want to do now is move on to this discovery journal that Jan and Fiona have developed. It's a place to record, your observations and conversations about the person you're assisting with work, whether you're a family member or you're somebody like me who does this kind of work for a living. And so what we have here is I'm going to show you the different slides, and just I've reframed the slides around stuff I talked about for Tim, and then you guys are going to have a little time to work in small groups on this together. So, for observations by family, these are things I got from his sister, that he was interested in disassembling family members' electronic devices, and just household chores. I got this from his mom, that he liked weed trimming, working out in the yard. He painted a bathroom vanity once. And then observations from me, like stripping and attaching the grounded plug to the light and the wire to the light fixture, the learning about data entry stuff, the working with Bill on rebuilding the lawnmower. So that told me about his interests, things from the family, things by others. And then conditions for success, the stuff about Tim needing clear parameters. Now, this is stuff that I learned some from his mom and my own observation too. We reflected on it together. Tasks shouldn't have excessive downtime. Tim's got to stay busy, she would say. If you don't give him something to do, he'll find something to do, and it may not be helpful. So be sure you're giving him something to do. Jobs need to be close to home so we could get there. And something other people wouldn't see as easy. Talking should be part of the job. All the stuff some of the condition stuff that I had learned about Tim. Oh, I do want to just share this one other thing, because this was really cool. This worked out. Bill gave Tim a ride to his job. His mom never needed to take him. Bill, his neighbor, took Tim to his jobs and back. All right, let's go back to the potential contributions then. That this authentic, transparent, genuine person and his innate mechanical ability. So how would this relate to your person of focus? And then there's also a form on record of conversations. So these are different people I talked to: his mom, his high school teacher, his sister, and his neighbor. There were some other people too, but anyhow. And then you all have a way to record this. And then there's this final page about parts of your community where you spend most time, and organization of a church and stuff like that. So anyhow, I want to be sure you all have a little bit of time to dive in to all of this. I think we have these forms. Let me just go back to the first one here, this interest form. What's been noticed about preferred tasks done with enthusiasm, with or without being asked, things that families have learned, things that other people have learned. So that's one of the charts you're going to want to pay attention to, right?
Yep. So just reflecting on that. And if you're joining today, you could be thinking about a focus person. And just sort of get a bit of a feel for this. This is just a great way, because we know a lot of families are capturing this, but then we just thought we'd give a simplified form for people to actually hold this information, because you can gather a lot, and knowing sort of what to capture and put into a document so it's not lost is really important. So
Yeah, I agree. It's a really nice forum for getting started with this, Jan. So I appreciate you all doing this. I apologize for you all not having sufficient time to discuss, but I'm really pleased that Jan and Fiona have these follow-up sessions arranged, and I think that's going to be really, really good. Jan and I were talking while you were in breakout rooms, and I said, one of the things that I learned from Tim is that things he was interested in, things that were learned, were never things that he told me. There were things that were learned from other people and watching him. So I think that was one really important piece of learning. It's not just what people say, it's finding out what people do. And I just want to close with one slide, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Jan. This is another discovery nugget from somebody about a lot of you all know John O'Brien from Georgia in the US. This is what John said. Establishing the practice of deep listening as the necessary foundation for co-creating valued community roles is the core of managing transformation. The appreciation of a person's gifts and capabilities that often emerge from careful listening energizes a journey of discovery. So thank you, John, for that. So thank you all for this opportunity. I'm going to turn it back over to Jan.
Oh, I just want to thank you so much, Milton. I've heard you present a number of times and I'm still learning from you. And I hope everyone in the room today has taken away some really lovely little nuggets of gold that you can go forth with. But the discovery process is that term is being used a lot, but often not in a genuine way. So I hope this is really helpful, hearing from Milton, where you generously shared your journey and your thinking prior to understanding and learning more about customised employment, and then how that changed the way you then worked with people. So I think even as parents, we can sort of learn a lot from that as well. So thank you so much. We will have the follow-up sessions as mentioned. Fiona's worked with a number of families in helping them through that discovery process, and what they sort of have come up with is just amazing. So I think that follow-up is really helpful rather than just letting you sail off and doing this alone. The follow-up sessions will be on the 16th of March and the 6th of April. Again, thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Thanks, Milton.
Okay, thank you, Jan. Thanks, everyone.